Hello, hello, hello. Testing, testing. Hello, hello. The hell? Hey, everybody. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry about that. Let me catch up on supers real quick. Um. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. Things are okay. Um. Don't want to get into details. A friend of mine is just hit a. I guess I'd say a rough patch, basically, and it was kind of a sudden, so that kind of took priority today. But of course, still wanted to do stream, so I am now here. Dare Boppler, thanks for the 5. Kuma Church has cross symbols. This clearly means Jorbo was crucified with the Jesus parallels. Do you think were his 10, 12? Who do you think were his 12 followers who betrayed him? Yeah, I feel like, oh, I completely forgot to check on this. Yeah, we're gonna get into this stream stuff right away. We're gonna get into it right away. We're gonna get into the tier list right away. Um, just because I know that, thank you all for being patient today. I know this is not the usual stream time. Oh man, this is not loading. Let me check to confirm if Emu is on Joy Boy's crew based on what Gaban says in the Viz. Let's see the Viz translations. Holy Roger, the King of the Pirates. Where is this? Hold on. Still the Pirates King crew, even decrepit, thou art so determined to believe. And then he says, like you aren't. Is that in reference to being part of the Pirate King's crew? Or believing, or in the believing? Like, believing that, yeah, Viz makes it more clear that they're talking about Luffy here. Thanks, Barvision. Thanks, man. Let me get rid of my, let me get rid of this pinned comment. Yeah, I don't know if they're in the same crew. As for Joy Boy being crucified, I mean, I do think that obviously all of the enemies of these Celestial Dragons were villainized in the end, so I personally do believe that Joy Boy ended up experiencing a similar fate to Odin, in a sense. As for his followers, I think we've seen some of them with Emith and Zunisha, but I still believe that the rest of them were all D tribe members that we see today, and D stands for member of the Dawn Pirates or whatever. Tiptier Treviso, thanks to 1 hour on Lower Square with my theory and still late. Do you want to share some of the troubleshooting things that you experienced with that? Tiptia? Uh, we're gonna go. I think we're gonna go over theories and stuff. From Lore Square, maybe in this Friday's stream. I think that could be fun. This Friday's stream, unless people feel like they didn't have enough of a heads up. Taptio, thanks for the 2. Is the Void Sentry flashback gonna be the most gray morally? I don't think so. I really don't think One Piece really doesn't do. Oda's thing is really not morally gray. It really isn't. I mean, he's not really trying to tackle morally gray stuff generally. It's with One Piece, the what it gets at with the morality stuff is more so about um it challenges the idea of like who is good and who is evil based on perception, right? Which is how much of what you believe is good and who is evil is based on what you've been told or the story that's been spun, right? But Oda's stance is pretty much always arc after arc establishing who is actually good versus who is actually evil. So it's not as so much like what is good, what is evil. It's all just some sort of spectrum or something like that. It's more so like who is actually good, who is actually evil is often not what you would expect. Oda is a character. I mean, character. Sorry, Oda is a writer who doesn't lean into there. It One Piece is a story of good guys and bad guys. At the end of the day, it's more so just who's labeled the good guy and the bad guy is where it gets a little messy. Tornado says, I don't know, Vegapunk made it seem like he couldn't judge who was good or bad. Yeah, meaning that at the moment, we don't have the full story. Because Vegapunk, from what he has learned from the past, couldn't figure out who was in the right or who was in the wrong, right? That doesn't mean that it's morally... Like, throughout the story, we know ultimately that pretty much all the good guy characters are the D tribe, right? All the good, like, everyone we've been learning from, like, all the characters that essentially we flash back to in this chapter, right? Literally everybody from here. Gaban, Rayleigh, Crocus, Shanks, Odin, Whitebeard, Roger. They're all good guy characters, and they're all carrying out the will of Joy Boy at the end of the day. It's not, Oda's not trying to do this sort of like, well, who's actually evil? All of these guys? Or Emu, right? Who's actually the good one? It's like, no, Emu and the Celestial Dragons are just blatantly and obviously the bad guys, and then these characters that we see in this chapter, who are all carrying out the will of D, the will of Joy Boy, yada yada, all of it coming down to Luffy, they're obviously the good guys, right? The fact that Vegapunk couldn't figure it out is just adding to the mystery of what actually went down then, but inevitably the truth is going to be the same as it's always been. Like, it's kind of like if you get to Dressrosa and it's like, oh, well, you know, we've been made to believe that, what do you call? Enel, or not Enel, sorry, Doflamingo, is the good guy and Riko's the bad guy. But whoa, turns out it's the opposite. Crazy, you know? That's the sort of thing that just happens throughout One Piece. In this case, Oda's not going to have that full reveal till we get to the Void Century, but I would simply say that I would really not expect Oda to suddenly change his writing style this deep into the story. Every single arc, it's the same thing. Skypiea, Dressrosa, Wano, yada yada. It's like, there is a good guy group and there is a bad guy group. There just always is. The only thing that's kind of needs to be unraveled is what actually happened. How did the waters become muddied as to who is good and bad? Empty Mind thanks the two top 5 Better Call Saul episodes. Also, please read Goodnight Pun Pun. I'm probably not going to read that. I know it's really, really good. I've heard it's amazing. It's like a very sad character-based story. I generally read manga to see characters throw hands. It's just the way it is. Vegapunk vague as fuck. That's funny. Yeah. Top 5 Better Call Saul episodes. Also, have you watched Spider-Man or The Odyssey? Empty Mind, let me answer first. Spider-Man or The Odyssey. Spider-Man, we're probably going to watch that next weekend. We're going to watch that next weekend, I think. Is like, there's a vague plan to do that. I'm not a huge Spider-Man person in general, but I actually really liked the last 2 Spider-Man movies I watched. What's the Across the Multiverse, obviously, and then is it No Way Home or Far From Home? I don't like the naming convention of the Spider-Man movies, because the first one's what, Homecoming, whatever the third one was, whatever the one was with all 3 Spider-Men, I actually really liked that, and I feel like that was a good movie, and then people turned around after a while and were like, it was actually not a good movie. It was just like nostalgia fest, and I was like, no, I think they actually closed out the character arcs for the other 2 Spider-Men better than their own movie series did. And then on top of that, I think the idea of using Aunt May's death as the stand-in for Uncle Ben's death for Tom Holland was a really good decision. It felt very natural, very earned, and we'd kind of been with this Aunt May a lot longer than the Uncle Ben's. I think that Spider-Man movie was good. So, for Brand New Day, I'm not particularly excited about it, just because I'm just not excited about Marvel stuff, period, in general. And again, I'm not the biggest Spider-Man person, but, you know, it's a thing, so we're probably just going to go watch it just to see. Odyssey, we watched finally this last weekend, and I really, really liked it. I think it took a little bit for me to start liking it. Christopher Nolan, he just makes he when he needs to establish the foundation opening parts of a film, it can just be like 30 minutes straight of just like music, quick exposition lines, cut to a different location, different scene, different characters, music, exposition lines, quick established stuff, move, 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 move. I was like not feeling it. I also feel like their the modernized language was really throwing me because I was like, I don't need them to speak in ancient Greek, but filmmaking is a lot about, manipulating your viewers' emotions. So if you're doing something that feels old and mythic, right? Then yeah, they don't need to speak in ancient Greek, but use old school language, That's just a part of it to me. So that was kind of it. And then, the highly diverse, like, fucking all races are Greek people now or whatever. To me, that in it on its own isn't necessarily it, but that coupled with the modernized language, for a little bit, I was like, this feels very Netflixy, not like, you know, the Odyssey necessarily. But as the movie went on, I came to really, really enjoy it. I really, really like the Odyssey. I would actually watch that again. In general, I think really enjoy movies that feel like they have a lot of mini stories packed into one. It just makes every part of the movie entertaining. I guess like I love kind of a miniature story. We get through that, reset. Okay, now what's the next one going to be? I mean, we all know what happens over the course of the Odyssey, but how it's done, how it's executed, I think it was just very well done. Um, I think he nailed it with the ending, how he brought it home. Don't want to do too many spoilers for it, but I really enjoyed that movie. I would watch it in theaters again. It's I don't want to do recency bias, but for me, it's maybe my second favorite or first favorite Christopher Nolan movie. It's either that or The Dark Knight. I actually really enjoyed this one. Averser says Nolan is an Oscar bait merchant, low key. I don't think so because legitimately, if you look at all of Nolan's films, to me it's the opposite. I think Oppenheimer. I think there's two times that he tried to bait for an Oscar because you've just been doing it for so long. You're a respected filmmaker at that point. It's kind of like, all right, give me some of the, give me some of the hardware because the Oscars mean jack shit in the long. Like, there's no one serious about films, and there's no serious cinephile, I guess you could say, who ever remotely considers Oscars. Like, Oscars don't even matter if you're like actually reviewing who's a good filmmaker, what's a good movie, who's not. It doesn't even come up in conversations. But to the layperson, Oscars are basically the name that is recognized, right? So it can probably feel frustrating to be like, I'm a really good director. I've made landmark films, but the average person might view me as someone without an Oscar. So then at a certain point, I can understand why you might feel baited into doing an Oscar bait movie, right? But if you look at most of Nolan's filmography, right, majority of it is some sort of sci-fi, fantasy, or psychological thriller, right? That's generally what he does. He does like sci-fi, psychological thriller, fantasy. Those are not traditional Oscar bait films. It's really fucking hard to win an Oscar with that type of film genre. He finally went Oscar bait with Dunkirk, missed with Dunkirk, and then was like, I like Dunkirk. I like Dunkirk for the record, but I'm saying he missed on the Oscars. He didn't get the Oscar for Dunkirk. So then he was like, okay, got to do this again. That must have been fucking frustrating because it's like I just want to go do my sci-fi bullshit, but I put all this time doing this shit for Dunkirk. They didn't give me the Oscar. Now I got to do this shit again. All right, let's do war film didn't work. Let's do a fucking biopic because those are some easy Oscar bait type categories, right? So then he had to take another swing at it with Oppenheimer. But generally speaking, he's not an Oscar bait person. Odyssey, again, it's generally hard for stuff that's like fantasy to win Oscars. That's not Oscar bait. This one might win the Academy Award. It might, just because it's it's a film that takes itself seriously. Not seriously enough to like update the language and like really lean into it, but it does take itself seriously. and it's very well made, and it's got a Academy Award winning cast, yada yada. Reina Wakura says Nolan hate exists because normies force him down everyone's throat in the first place. I mean, it's the silly thing where it's like, if you're a big film person, right, or it applies to any genre or any medium, sorry, any medium, where if you're like a connoisseur in that medium, then even if you like something, if suddenly everybody, like all the quote unquote normies, start liking it, then you get defensive about it, and it's like, well, my favorite thing, like, I've watched 10,000 movies. My favorite movie can't be the same as somebody who just watches like Blockbuster of the Month or something like that, right? And so then then your guard goes up and it's like, well, it's actually not that good. This is something that only normies would really like. Like, I see it's good, but it's not as good as like fucking like insert obscure Swedish film from 1942 or something like that, right? That's kind of just how the human brain works. I think everybody's guilty of it to some degree. You just even if you like something, as soon as you start to feel like, oh well, everybody really likes something, you get the sense of like, no, we're not the same, right? Like, I really care about this film shit. I'm not the same as just random movie popcorn eater number 52 or whatever, right? So then you just got to be like, I like it, but I don't like it that much. I don't like it that much. Nolan's really good, but he's no fucking Federico Fellini or some shit. Like, that's just the way it is, it's natural. Anyway, 5 favorite Better Call Saul episodes. I don't know their names off the top of my head. Court scene with Chuck. I don't want to spoil too much. Court scene with Chuck. The one where everything goes down with Howard. One where everything goes down with Gus and Lalo. Maybe the final episode. The one where everything goes down with Nacho. Alright? Those are my 5. Not in order. That's the 5 that came to my head. Let's get stream likes up to 50 real quick. One Piece fan 74, thanks for the 5. If Emu was the devil, I could see him try to tempt Zoro and Sanji into joining the Gods Knights after their after their victory. I could definitely see that. They'd be like, fuck no. Powerful Analyst says 8.5 clears Nolan for real. I mean, like, look, I oh my god. Still getting over whatever I had last week. It's not as bad now, but my throat is still not the best. Tornado says you just explained One Piece haters. No. I think One Piece haters are different. Because with One Piece haters, I think that genuinely, like, I still have One Piece as my favorite story ever, but I critique the shit out of One Piece for a lot of reasons. One Piece, I think, like, you really don't need some sort of really high standard to... I think One Piece is a series where it does so many things phenomenally that people kind of brainwash themselves to some degree to overlook all of the areas where it's, like, below average and, like, clearly below average, or, like, it's just sloppy stuff. I don't know. My god. Here's the thing I'll say about, like, One Piece haters. I don't think there's, like, a big faction of people that just hate on One Piece because they're manga elitists. I don't think that's the case. Largely because I think that One Piece is interesting in that, my god, One Piece is so long that you actually need to get pretty far into One Piece to be able to properly critique it. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do the stream. Holy shit. And anybody that gets far enough into One Piece does ultimately become a One Piece fan. So I think most of One Piece critiques come from people who are actually fans of the series. All right, continuing on. It wasn't this bad earlier today. One Piece glazers are honestly worse. Yeah, I don't think so. Or yeah, I do think so. Yeah, chicanery. Yeah. Wild strawberries are a masterpiece, though. Wild strawberries. Do I put that above? I don't know. Okay. Wild Strawberries, Persona, and Seven Seal are the only three that I've watched from Bergman. Uh, oh my god, I might need to take a break or take like a cough thing or something like that. I wasn't like this earlier. Um, yeah, I'm not trying to knock Swedish films from the 20th century. I've seen both ends. Okay, I've seen both ends. Um, I'm just trying to say that if you want to critique like a Nolan film, let it come from actually critiquing the film itself. Like, just where does the desire to critique it come from, right? Does it come from like actually not liking aspects of the film? Or does it come from liking the film but disliking the fact that normies like it and therefore needing some sense of superiority and therefore trying to push it down and promote things that are a bit more obscure to the average person, you know? Continuing on. Talking a lot to a camera dries out your throat. Morge, you're probably right. All right, continuing on. Um, yeah, but I like the Odyssey a lot. I like the Odyssey a lot. Yeah, I don't know if that's my favorite of the Dark Knight. I don't know. I watched Persona and Pacific Rim on the same day. A good movie can be anything. Yeah, yeah. Pacific Rim, I feel like actually it low-key doesn't hold up if you outside of theaters as well. So when I watched Pacific Rim in theaters the first time, it was my uh I don't know, guys. This might actually be a no go. Let me slow down. Let me not do the tangents. Let me do the super chats. Let's leave Pacific Rim alone for a second. All right. Also, let's get stream likes up to 50 to fix my throat. Dared Orphan, thanks for the 5. Do you think that Luffy will send Imu back with his Conqueror's Haki upgrade just like Jobo's Haki Knot, kind of showing that he's leveled up to Jobo's Haki? Dared Orphan, watch out for tomorrow's video. That will answer your question in far greater detail. Tiptia Treviso, thanks for the 5. Morge, Kagurabachi, I'm going to wait till the flashback is over. The last 4 chapters have covered flashback in flashbacks, and the pace is slowing down to the most it's ever been. No spoilers. I actually really like that. Obviously, I'm going to have to wait longer to read, but that means that the author, I forget his name, mangaka, that suggests that he's really planned out very, very deeply in depth the entire context behind the modern day conflict. So I like that a lot. That suggests a lot of a very solid foundation for the ending of the story. Joseph eBay, thanks for being a Pirate King tier member for 22 months. Yo Morge, thanks for streaming today. Hope everything's good with you and those around you. Happy to see you here. Thank you very much, Joseph eBay. I hope you got your submission in for the Pirate King podcast. I will be recording that on Wednesday. Pirate King podcast is, for those of you who don't know, a podcast for my top tier of members and patrons. It is an hour and a half long podcast where you submit your questions and answer every single question in great detail, greater detail that I can on streams. So if you would like to support the channel, if you want access to all previous podcasts, if you want to get your question in for this podcast, then definitely consider doing so. I'll be recording by Wednesday, I think, at the absolute latest. Unless my throat is really bad, because I don't want to be doing this the whole time. Parvision says Kagurabachi's so dope. Dude, I like Kagurabachi so much. I really love Kagurabachi right now. I mean, haven't caught up since the flashback started, But I really love Kagurabachi. Your health is not worth this. Physically, I'm pretty good. So let me explain this. Last week, I was pretty low. I was pretty low physically. Over the weekend, I think it's sort of gotten better. And now I'm pretty good, but my throat is not good. Drink water. Drink water.10. Cheers, dude. Luffy's first hit, and only hit, if I remember, was Advanced Conqueror's Haki with the gap in base form. Oda could have not made it any clearer. That's what Luffy needs to do this arc? Yeah, I would agree. I would personally agree. I think that that's going to be the answer. JP, thanks for the 10. Tried using the theory site you mentioned the last couple streams. Can't post without first contributing evidence to existing theories. Tried adding evidence and it gets stuck in submitting. Thank you for all this feedback. I will relay this over. I did not actually have time to relay over the stuff from last stream, so I think I'll just send him a big email with what you guys are saying here and from last stream. So thank you very much. Japtio saying, yeah, that was hard. I had to do some filler stuff before. Yeah, I think barrier to entry it should just be easy. So let me explain that. Danny Rice 9010, thanks for the 5. Hey Morge, always love watching your content, man. Who do you think they will never meet again / they will meet is from the mural? I personally think it's not people. I think it's the world, like the physical state of the world. I talk about in my personal, like in the mural video that I have, I talk about how I think the One Piece is bringing the world back to what it once was, which is one single continent with the sea levels being lower. I think what happened at the end of the first world was all the continents broke up, which is why it ends with they won't meet again. And then the end of the second world, the seas rise up and then flood the continents, creating only islands, so everything's separated even further, so they won't meet again. And then I think at the end of the third world, they will meet again, means flood goes down, continents all reconnect, they meet again. Let me get to the tier list for the sake of time. So first of all, everybody, big shout outs to TomTom, everyone. Big shout outs to TomTom. Let's get stream likes up to 50 real quick. Big shout outs to TomTom for creating this tier list for us. TomTom asked, wait, is Vegapunk old gen? Nah, we leave Vegapunk out. He's young at heart. And he's still around, you know, like in a young body, I guess you could say, with Lilith. Here we go. So this is rating them as characters. Let's be very, very clear here. This is not who beats whom. This is the best old gen characters. And, yeah, we got a nice batch to pick from. That means the world got divided back in the first world. Yeah, I think there was 2 great events. First was the shattering of the world. And then the second was the flooding. Parvision says, if King Neptune isn't on the tier list, I shoot. Is he that old? I guess he is. He's old gen. But he doesn't seem that old. Alright, let's get into it. To start with, Crocus. Crocus is fucking hilarious. Let's put him in B. He's a solid character. Gabon? I got Gabon at A. I think Gabon's an A tier character. A tier old guy. JP, thanks for the 2. I've seen enough. Ragnar, best oldest gen character. That's fair. Let me give an example of an S tier old character, right? So Rox is the example of an S tier old character. Tragic, deep story, phenomenal personality, charisma. Just his entire character trajectory was so amazing. Fell in love, gave everything up. Just from his debut, right? From his debut, challenging the world, building the greatest pirate crew ever, becoming the greatest pirate who ever lived, giving it all up for love, throwing it all away, and then going down in a blaze of glory at first, but then in a very tragic, sad sort of shameful. I wouldn't say shameful, but he went out basically in the saddest manner imaginable. Sorry, I can't string words together as well at this moment. I'm not my best self. Roger is S. Roger was S. Roger has now been demoted to B. You cannot convince me that Roger is a better character than his wings, or that he's as good as his wings. I think what we've seen from Rayleigh and Gabon is much more enjoyable and much more interesting characters, I'd say, than Roger. Roger seemed, to me, peak Roger seemed like this very fascinating, mystical, intriguing, charismatic figure for so many years. The Odin flashback, Roger laughed, etc. And then we got the God Valley flashback, the whole Rock storyline, and it's just like, okay, Roger doesn't have that much under the hood. It's kind of just a dude. Don't know what it is. Maybe Oda will fix this over time, but you cannot tell me that Gabon and Rayleigh are not clearly better written, more multidimensional characters, more interesting, more charismatic characters than Roger at this point in time. I think Roger's a solid B. Garp. Or alternate spelling. Who knows the alternate spelling of Garp? Julian Reed, thanks for the 2. Can someone explain why God Valley was so bad for Roger? It wasn't bad for Roger. It just didn't... I guess it's bad for Roger. I guess I would say bad for Roger. Bad for Roger in the sense that, I've talked about this before, if you go into the Rocks flashback, you come away from the Rocks flashback with pretty much every single major character through that flashback being given a lot more depth and nuance. Even characters like fucking Kaido and Big Mom suddenly gain this whole additional side to them, right? Rayleigh gets an additional story, and then characters like Garp. We fleshed out and answered so many questions about Garp over the course of the God Valley flashback. What he actually stands for, the types of conflicts, internal conflicts that he has. Fucking Dragon, we got so much more, hey, it took a boy. More out of Dragon there. Rocks, of course, turned Rocks from this, like, evil villain silhouette figure into one of the most layered, and one of the only truly, actually, arguably morally complex characters in One Piece, right? So you're adding so much to all of these characters. Fucking Whitebeard, even, who's already had so much character work done, even he gains depth and more layers to his character and his story and his tragedy over the course of the Rocks flashback. The only character that God Valley did nothing for, right, despite giving him a lot of screen time and panel time, was Roger. Roger is no more interesting a character by the end of the flashback than he was at the beginning. And if anything, over the course of that flashback and seeing so much of him kind of depicts the truth being that there's not much to see. There's not a particularly complex or interesting character underneath there. And, you don't have to be the most complex or interesting character. Not everybody is. But there's also not that unique of a character underneath there. I got to the end of the Rocks flashback, and I was kind of just like, Roger feels like an archetype that we kind of see in a lot of different ways in One Piece, and he's kind of just like a generic character for One Piece. Warp is S. That is how you spell Garp. I'm going to go ahead and put him in A. I don't think he's as great of a character as Rocks. Hold on. Let me change this rule. Roger's growth likely came after God Valley. Yeah, sure. And if we see that, then I'd be happy to bump him up to A or S tier. But he's the only character that we finished the entire... Like, at this point, it's hard to give him an excuse because it was a 20-chapter long flashback, and Roger was at least the second or third most... No, I guess Harold and Loki were a greater focus, but at least during the Rocks Pirates days, which was the meat of the flashback, and of course God Valley, Roger had, like, star billing. And he's the only one of them who doesn't really gain much depth or nuance over the course of that. Federico Armada says he fathered the archetype. Not really. We see too little. Like, we only see the first couple panels of him. That's to start One Piece. That's too little to claim that that's fathering the archetype, especially if we see it in a lot of like. There needs to be more. There needs to be more because nobody had this issue with Roger. Everybody liked Roger as a character after the Roger laugh. That was iconic, amazing, etc. It's once you kind of get to see more and more of him, you realize that there isn't that much to there isn't that much more that makes him stand out compared to, bold freedom loving adventurer number like 52, Garp could be. I think Garp's got an argument for S. Whitebeard is another S. Yes, Whitebeard for sure. Whitebeard easy S. Whitebeard easy S. Whitebeard or rocks. I think Garp. Do I put Garp S or not? I don't know. Here, I'll do a poll. I'll do a poll. Let's get through some other ones first. Let's get through some other ones. Bogart. Oh, Parvision. I'm so sorry you got to be here to watch me do this. Is Parvision watching? Par, are you here? Parvision. Parvision, talk to me. I need you to be here. I need you to watch this. Garp pulled up alone. Everyone else pulled up with the crew. Yeah. Rizzy4541. Thanks for the 200 jewels. Thanks for jamming. JP, thanks for the 5. Gloriosa and 1160 really said, if I save Shaki, Roger will be grateful. And it made her kind of icky to me. That is your sister in arms. I think that's just Oda humor. That's just Oda humor. Tiptia Treviso says, why is Morge acting like he's doing the internet version of CPR? In my mind right now, I'm Gus, and Parvision is Hector after he has his heart attack. I need him to watch. I need him to be here so that he can watch me create a new tier called E, where I drop Bogarded. All right, we'll wait. Maybe he returns. Odin. No. Gloriosa. Never really likable, right? C tier, maybe D tier, arguably. I'd put Harold in B alongside Roger, where it's kind of like a mixed bag. I see the concept, I see the vision of why he could be great, but he's just not that dude. There's just too much kind of holding him back. Odin, I'm gonna go ahead and put an A. The problem with Odin to me is that he never really felt like a person. He feels like a concept throughout it. But I still find Odin more compelling as a character than Roger. Shiki. Let's put him here. Didn't do jack shit. Stussy. Let's put her here. Didn't really do jack shit. Suru. I'm gonna go ahead and put Suru here. Basically B tier. Hold on. Yeah. Yeah, B tier is essentially. I think B tier is basically gonna be how do I say this? B tier is characters that are like a mixed bag, like in some ways great, but some ways not so great, or characters who have like small screen time but like make a nice impact with it. TomTom says Sura's done less than everyone in C. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you can do a lot. I mean, by that logic, Yamato should be fucking S tier, because she's done a lot more than these fucks, you know? Roger at B is so criminal law. Hey, take it up with Oda. Take it up with Oda. Julian Reed, thanks for the 5. I like God Value for Roger because it humanized him, in my opinion. He's slowly gone from a myth of a man to seeing him have flaws and struggles like the others. Hope we see more, though. I disagree. I disagree. There's a difference between, like, well, I agree with you at the most surface level of, like, it humanized him and that it kind of killed the myth and just showed who he was. But who he is isn't that interesting. Like, for example, you could take a character like Dragon, and for all of pre-time skip, Dragon is this really dark, mystical, brooding figure. What is that man planning? He's like this larger than life, like everybody freaks out when they hear his name, right? And then you get God Valley, where you actually see who Dragon is as a person, right? You see his flaws, his struggles, you see his internal dilemma, his moral conflicts, etc., right? It makes him it humanizes him. It removes the image of like Dragon, this mysterious, inscrutable figure, and it puts a very compelling human with depth and nuance, etc., in its place, right? God Valley doesn't do that for Roger. It takes away the myth and leaves basically like a cookie cutter character. Does that make sense? Um, Again, yeah, just look at the comparison. I think that's a pretty easy comparison. I mean, in story even, Roger and Dragon are kind of brought up as like, you know, the worst criminal of yesterday compared to the worst criminal of today. Akainu hates Roger's son and Dragon's son, yada yada, Ace and Luffy, yada yada. But just, you know, if you want to understand where I'm coming from, just compare what the God Valley flashback did for Dragon, compare the writing for him compared to the writing for Roger, right? Humanizing, like, some characters, it appears, just work better if they're allowed to be a little bit at a distance and feel more of a mythic figure, right? Sometimes that's okay if you don't actually have that compelling or interesting of a person to write underneath it when you pull back the curtain, you know? Um, Garp, you know? God Valley did wonders for Garp's character. Add so many layers, so much more nuance, right? It did not do the same for Roger, you know? It did not do the same for Roger. We might see something different. I think Zolden mentioned last stream that maybe when we get Shanks' flashback, we finally get to see um, Roger transforming post God Valley into the version that we know of him at Laugh-Tale, right? Because that Roger seemed really cool, and it was like, where did you get this really big dream? Like, what was driving you? Where did you get this vision, etc.? That Roger was so interesting, right? So maybe Roger then will become an S tier character again. But at the moment, I can't imagine that being the case. Taptia says a mix of Sanji, Luffy's, and Ace's worst traits. That's actually an interesting way to put it. Yeah, I think it's kind of like those traits are often balanced out by other aspects of their character, but Roger kind of just has them all thrown together. The redeeming quality is essentially that he's got strong will and won't back down, but that's not, you know, to protect his friends or whatever, but that's not really anything unique in One Piece at this point. God Valley did add nuance to Roger, it was just bad nuance. I don't know. Okay, Sengoku. I think a C. Goku, we've seen a lot of at this point. He kind of just sucks. He kind of just sucks. There's not really much going on with this dude. Shaki, I'm gonna go ahead and put her in B. You know, same reasoning as Crocus, Suru. Yeah, Garlic C. Grizzly Adams. Thank you for the 5. All of Roger's aura is in his mustache. That's a good way to put it. Chinja, I'm gonna go ahead and put in C. Kong, I'm gonna go ahead and put in D. Bogard, I'll put in D. I like this list. I think this is a good list. I think the only character you can argue is Garp. Let's see. Let's see. Garp. S.A. I don't consider Garp to be an S tier character in One Piece. If you want to argue that Garp is S tier by the standards of all the old gen, I could see that. I don't think he's an S tier character by the standards of One Piece. I don't know. Harold is above Oden? I think Harold was. I think it's just really fucking hard to like Harold because I get what Oda was going for. I've done a whole analysis on this. I've done an analysis on Rocks and Harold, what Oda was going for with both characters. But at the end of the day, even if I think the concept was good, it just. I frankly find Odin more of a likable character than Harold. I can do a poll for that to see if. I don't know. Odin just doesn't feel like a very real person to me, though. I get like again, I said this before. He feels like a concept. Harold feels like very flawed and human, but to a point that it's just like I think Oda wants us to view him as noble and sympathetic, but it's almost too far. Where I think it's like Oda is kind of just dumb at a certain point, in my opinion. All right, we can move Garp up. Is Roger at B? What the fuck? Roger's one of the best characters in fiction. Roger was one of the best characters in fiction. And then we got to see the man in his heyday. And it was kind of just like, this is just a dude without anything really special going for him, other than he's got really strong hockey. Odin, when it turns out the supervillain oh, that's true. I forgot. Odin was arguably dumber than Harold. Shit. Yeah, Odin and Harold. They're cut from the same cloth, aren't they? They're cut from the same cloth. Okay, okay. Then I'll ask you this. Roger greater than Odin, in my opinion? No. Odin at least has, like... No, I don't know. Is Roger greater than Odin? Okay, we can agree that none of them are above Gaban and Rayleigh, right? So let's work from there. Okay, fine, fine. Okay, let's start with this. Yeah, Odin. Odin is kind of carried by his ending, though, right? But then by that logic, Roger is too. Here's the thing. Okay. So I'm being somewhat biased. I'm being somewhat. Let me acknowledge this. I'm being somewhat biased because the tricky thing is that with Odin, I think I was kind of like lukewarm on Odin for most of his story, but Odin goes out with an absolute banger, right? Like he goes out with a bang. So that's kind of I kind of it's not it's kind of like how the character hits you. So Odin's final impression on me emotionally is a positive one because I like Odin's boiling scene. With Roger, we kind of got his best stuff already. Like obviously lead in the opening of One Piece, obviously with the iconic scene, wealth, fame, power, etc. And then we get the Roger laughed stuff. And then it's just the latest stuff that we got with Roger is kind of the most generic and lame stuff, right? So that's my most recent personal feelings towards the character where they stem from. So here's what I'd say. I'd say Roger, Odin, and Harold, they should all be in the same tier. I think they're all B tier characters. Because they're good in some ways, weaker in other ways. Yeah. I think that they all I think this is fair. Yeah, Odin's Born to Boil is obviously sick. Diptia says Harold makes Elbaf the nicest place to live in the entire world. Odin literally allowed Wano to be oppressed for 20 years by his own stupidity. But that's using outcome based reasoning, right? The reality is that Harold would have literally destroyed. Forget Elbaf. Harold would have, based on it, due to his decision making, he was literally about to destroy the entire world, like the entire world, if Loki hadn't fortunately stopped him right there, right? They got very, very like nobody fucked up worse than Harold. Emu essentially turned Harold into a weapon of mass destruction that would have destroyed the planet, right? So, yeah, we got lucky in the sense that Harold's terrible decision making got bailed out, at the last second by his son. And his son went on to like keep his father's name clean, hide that reality from everybody. But based on Harold's own decision making, he would have caused the entire world to burn down, right? He was the dumbest ruler of all the rulers that we've ever had, right? Call Odin dumb when you if you want or whatever, but it's like a stupid versus stupid competition here, but at least at some point Odin realized when was the right time to fight or whatever. Harold's path that he had taken them down was basically the apocalypse. Like literally for the entire planet, the apocalypse. Like it's outright stated by Gabon that if Loki had not stopped Harold right there, they all die. Like the entire planet dies. Yeah. Odin is such a Gary Stew that his subordinates refuse to point out the flaws in him. Sorry, Morchi sucks. Yeah, I'm keeping them both in B. I'm keeping them both in B. I think you guys are right. It's really just the Born to Boil scene that I was like, that was a good scene. Like, let's, I don't know. So Big Mom, actually, Tom Tom and I had discussions about whether or not we should include Big Mom in this. Because when people talk about the old gen, they don't necessarily talk about Big Mom, but she is part of this generation. Like, the reality is that it's kind of a sliding scale. Because it's like, well, if you include Big Mom, then are we now including Kaido? Kaido's a solid deal younger than Big Mom. But people tend to think of Big Mom as a modern day Yonko rather than she's kind of like the bridge. She's kind of like the in between, you know? Because everybody else here are basically characters who are clearly today, they're all past their prime, they're old, retired, weaker, whatever. Big Mom was still very clearly like in her, she was still at full potential or whatever when like she's still, and visually she doesn't seem as old as the rest, so it's hard to like concretely block her as part of the old generation because I guess the way I'd put it is age wise, she arguably is with them. Age wise, it feels right. But in terms of her narrative presence and her role in the way that Oda's kind of portrayed her, she feels more like a modern day character. It's kind of like with Blackbeard, age wise, he's part of Shanks' generation, obviously, but he feels more like a modern, worst gen character in a sense, right? It's a sliding scale, as I said. So Big Mom, arguably, yeah, part of the old generation, but then it's like, well, Kaido was at God Valley too. He was just younger than everybody else back then, but he was still he lived through that era, And then you can take a step further and be like, well, Dragon was there, and Dragon kind of got a start there. So yeah, I don't know. Dragon was obviously a kid. These guys were all in their late 30s and 40s. Big Mom was what in her was she 30 or something? I think Big Mom makes sense being in worst gen or old gen here. If she was here, I would just put her in B. Similar to I would put Big Mom in C. I'd put Big Mom in C. Um I think B is a mixed bag where there's good and the bad. I guess the way I'd put it is this. S basically represents great characters. A represents very good characters. Or yeah, very good or good characters, right? Yeah. A represents good, right? S is great, A is good, B is kind of like more positive than negative. All right, more positive than negative, but more of a mixed bag, right? I guess you could say A is very good, B is good, B is good, but not like there's stuff weighing him down, right? B can also be considered characters that are good, but just have like pretty really enjoyable, right? But just don't have enough screen time or really depth to their character to put any further higher, right? And then C, I think, is like basically also a mixed bag, but now leaning a little bit kind of like, all right, negative. I would put Big Mom here. Big Mom grew on me after God Valley, though, is the thing. So I might put Big Mom. I found her more of an interesting and likable character after God Valley, like the whole Rocks flashback. So she almost makes it here. Yeah, and then D is just bad. Drink water top 10. Thanks for the 5. Harold really was tragic. He started out as this brash, trash, strong, and he turned soft, but also being put in a rough position as king. I think one of the things would be like if we'd gotten to spend So much of One Piece, it's like Oda's got a great outline for a character, but we just don't have time. We don't have infinite time, you know? Harold, I think if we got to see, Harold's transformation essentially, right? His transformation from, like you said, brash, trash, strong, it happens in the span of half a chapter, right? From that to like a super soft, super pacifistic dude. So the tricky thing with Harold is that if we were doing a full-on Harold-focused flashback, Oda could have done this character way more justice because that is a really interesting transformation, right? Going from the strongest character on the ocean because he didn't know Emu exists, right? So the strongest character in the world, um, essentially King of the Pirates before King of the Pirates was a modern day thing, right? So going from strongest in the world, calling himself a god, god complex, like an Enel type figure, into a very soft, purely pacifistic, I'll never use my strength, none of us giants will abuse our strengths type character. Like that hard shift from all the way one end to the other end. It's a great writing concept, right? A giant who's just so powerful that he can do anything he wants, but then eventually realizes that the most important thing he can do is hold back that power and try and form relationships instead, right? That's a great story. Problem is the story flies by really fast. It happens in half a chapter, right? That whole character switch. So you're not able to sit with it as long as some of other One Piece character arcs, right? So Harold's most compelling part of his story, it almost becomes a footnote in the broader God Valley Rocks Elbaf flashback, right? And then as we keep peeking in on Harold's goings ons, however you say it, over the course of that flashback, each time we peek in on him, it's like he's doing something stupider and stupider. And so this moment is like a really noble moment, him tearing off his horns and everything like that. But it's also just like um the most compelling part of his story where he could really have been made to feel for his character, I think already kind of passed. And yeah, I think Oda, it's just time. I think the ideas are all there. I like the concept quite a bit. Again, I talk about it in great detail in my analysis of Rocks and Harold. It's just yeah, it's just sometimes take it like there's only so much story space to really flesh out a really good idea. JP, thanks for the two. Does Brook count as old gen? He technically should. If he was, I'd just put him in S. But yeah, he technically should. That's a good point. JP, thanks for the 5. Big Mom is like pre-Solomon Hill injury Lakers Braun. Old but still in late prime. I can see that. I just think that there's never... I kind of just am going to assume a character is in their prime unless Oda implies that they're not. Does that make sense? So, because otherwise you could argue that, like, well, Akainu's like 50-something, right? He should be slowing down because 50 is not really your physical prime anymore, right? I don't think at any point Oda's implying that Akainu's not in his prime, you know? I even go so far as to say that I think Marineford's, I think that Sengoku at Marineford may have actually still been in his prime because Sengoku is made to look like a young, like he's made to look the same age as the admirals. He doesn't look any older. It's as soon as he retires that Oda starts drawing him very old and everything like that, right? I think Oda makes it clear when a character is no longer in his prime by just having them point that he does visual things, appearance things. He makes them get really tired really fast. They often go huff huff or talk about how they're low on stamina. Um, he has them mention how they don't have as much power as they used to or strength, etc. I get the Sengoku Marineford take. Maybe that's a little too hot of a take, but Big Mom has always been portrayed as like a freak of nature, so I don't think rules necessarily apply to her the same way. But you can look at someone like Gloriosa and be like, clearly Oda's no longer trying to portray her as being in her full strength. Clearly Oda's not trying to portray Stussy as still being at her full strength. But with Big Mom, if you didn't know, let me put it this way. With Big Mom, if we had never been told her age, nobody would have ever at any point questioned that she's in her prime, you know? Does that make sense? Yeah, Kainu and Kizaru looked older than Sengoku at Marineford. Yeah, I don't think... I think by the time of Marineford, Oda was very, like, Garp, gray hair, and literally in Garp's first moment of action at the end of Water 7, or sorry, at the end of Enies Lobby, whatever, is him explaining that his power has declined a lot, right? Sengoku is both things. At Marineford, he looks fucking young. You would never know his age unless you're told it, right? He never gives any indicate like in terms of visual depiction, I think Oda's still portraying him as, a fighting fit leader of the Marines, both in terms of visual depiction and just in terms of portrayal, right? Oda does a lot of things when he wants to establish a character is out of shape and old, right? Like look at Whitebeard. Whitebeard fucking heart attacks constantly on life support, yada yada, trying to make it very clear Whitebeard is way declined, right? Oda made clear from right away that Garp is declined, right? Oda did not do the same for Sengoku at any point, but now he's kind of done the visual changes. I think part of how much you stay in your prime is also a bit dependent on just how dedicated, like, I don't think it's just a blanket age thing. Because, again, Whitebeard is younger than a lot of those characters, but aged a lot faster, right? I think part of it is, health related stuff. And then part of it is just um, how much do you actually stay in shape, right? Rayleigh basically said something like, I haven't held a sword in decades or something like that. Gaban talks about how his bones are rusty. He's retired. He's living the family life, right? Sengoku is the fleet admiral of the Marines. He's still very, very much pushing himself, it seemed like, to be worthy of that position, and he takes that position very seriously. Garp, ever since Roger went out, has basically been kind of on, like, it seems like he's kind of been on cruise control. He doesn't think of the new generation of pirates as anything to scoff at, really. Gorosei are old gen, so they are old gen. Yeah, Gorosei, yeah, we could get into Gorosei and stuff like that, but I don't know. Yeah, that's my interpretation. If people want to be like Big Mom was way stronger in her prime or something like that, I don't know. Or Sengoku was way past his prime at Marineford. I don't think that I just don't think that that's how Oda portrayed it. But you never know. Um, Especially with Big Mom. Again, with Big Mom from the beginning, she was just freakishly physically, like, she doesn't work like other humans do physically. Even Kaido's not as much of a physical like freak of nature as she is. Like from 5 years old, she was doing insane shit. So I don't know. No, it's not a power scaling tier list. It's look, like I've got the wings above fucking Roger. This is a character tier list. All right. All right. Let's do a poll for our favorite character. Let's do a poll for our favorite character. She's out of her prime because of mental illness and fat, not her age. I just don't. Again, I think that Oda needs to depict her in that way. It did not like. It seemed like Big Mom is really freakishly strong still. Like the way that Capone Beige described her, like this impenetrable iron balloon, right? Big Mom has always seemed kind of like a powerhouse more than anything. Even in her younger days, she's not like a fucking speed freak or something like that. I just don't know. I think there needs to be written implication that she's past her prime, Because otherwise, it's like, I don't know. By that logic, why is it like Akainu? Is Akainu not in his prime anymore? If you just go by age, then I think you got to go by portrayal a little bit. And Big Mom being insane, therefore her not being in her prime, I think she's always been kind of cuckoo. It just was hidden well earlier. The boy who cried. What is this? The boy who cried Super Saiyan. Thanks to the two primes in One Piece are from 36 to late 60s. I think it just depends on the person. I think it depends on the character. Like Moria's not that old, but his prime was a lot younger, right? I think it just depends on how Oda portrays the character. I think the way Oda wrote Kaido and Big Mom, the implication was that they've gotten a lot stronger over the course of the last 20 years, right? I think that's even established a couple times in the story, at least once, that Kaido and Big Mom have become a lot stronger over the last 20 years. Someone like Whitebeard has become a lot weaker. Who's that dude next to Kong? Exactly why he's in D tier. All right. Tiptia says, I need more evidence for a morbidly obese 68-year-old being not in their prime. Because it needs to actually be implied in the story. That's like saying that, because Jozu's or like Lucky Roo's obese, therefore they're nerfed in a way. It's just like, no, that's just how the character's drawn. All I like the evidence is literally just like anytime a character is no longer in their prime, Oda just establishes for us that they're no longer in their prime, if anything, Oda's established that Big Mom is a lot stronger now than she was before. So, yeah, I think you do need evidence. Especially because Big Mom is established to be an exception in terms of how, the human body works. So, because she's been established to be an exception since birth, as basically just a freak of nature, you can't just say she's 68, therefore she's weaker. I think you need something a little bit more concrete. Because again, by that logic, then you can be like, well, Akainu's not in his prime, right? You could just say that because, well, he's in his 50s. So the story needs to establish whether they're in their prime or not. All right. Continuing on. Let's do the poll for best character. Best old gen character. We got Rox, Whitebeard, Garp. Harold A? No, Harold's not A. Come on. Yeah, this is why I just don't know if Garp belongs in S. No, well, we already voted him. Let me run this again with just Rox and Whitebeard, because they're kind of just mopping the floor with Garp. Best old gen character. This is gonna be tight. These are two phenomenal characters. I don't know who's the better character. I think there's no wrong answer here. I think Whitebeard has the most powerful moments for me over the course of Marineford, but Rox just has that charisma. Like, I think I like Rox better. I think Whitebeard, I like his moments better. Who's better written? It's just who you prefer, I think, at the end of the day. I think it's really, really, really tight. Yeah, I think there's no wrong answers here. This is tight. Everybody get your votes in. Andrew says LARP is only an S if this is a tier list for hunting / killing pregnant women / and babies. I lean towards putting Garp at like A. I see why he's an S tier character. I lean towards putting him in A or somewhere in between S and A. Yeah, everybody get your votes in. This is really tight. This is actually a can we call a tie, says Tornado? Honestly, I mean, like, I love both of these characters. I don't want to be like, oh, this one's better than the other or whatever. I think out of the two, if you ask Morge, right, who's your favorite out of the two? I think I might lean Rox as being my favorite out of the two. But if you ask me like who's the better character, Whitebeard's. I'd say out of the archetype of the old guy in shonen, right? Like the old strong guys in shonen, right? That archetype. Whitebeard is my favorite version of that archetype ever. And really in any story, like you can expand it outside, fuck throw in movies and books and shit. I like Whitebeard even more than fucking Obi-Wan, Yoda, uh, Dumbledore, Gandalf, all the classic ones, you know? Just Whitebeard going out at Marineford is just a really cool way to do it. Um, yeah. But I think in the context of One Piece, I might like Rocks better. It's really hard to say. I don't know who. Yeah, I like Rocks better. Who's the better character? I don't know. I don't know. Mine is Yamamoto. Yamamoto's got a really cool Bankai. I'll give him that. But he's always been a giant dick in my in my eyes. Um, Yamamoto is obviously badass though. Yeah, just view him as a dick. Um, this is dead even. Seriously, guys, get your votes in because any vote can swing it here. I think one of the cool things that Oda did with Whitebeard that really makes him stand out is that generally speaking, if you think about all of these like old sensei, like old wise, super strong characters in stories, right? Again, I mean, like I've listed examples. Um, fucking Obi-Wan, Yoda, Gandalf, Dumbledore, those type of guys, they're usually depicted as, you know, these frail old men who are like old and wizened and stuff, who are still very strong and powerful, right? Fucking you know, it's just the way these things go, right? I think what Oda, like, same with the third Hokage, Jiraiya, you know, even Yamamoto, right? Um, but with Whitebeard, I think the way that Oda did it that was really cool was that it's this old dude, but it's this fucking gigantic, jacked, like, physical force of a man. That was kind of rare, at least in terms of storytelling up till then. You know, it was kind of rare to see that. And so like you're used to kind of seeing like and Whitebeard was still, you know, he's still frail by his standards, having heart attacks and shit like that. But in Marineford, the thing that kind of stands out is just how much of a fucking tank Whitebeard is, right? The story's progressed since then, so now we view characters like Kaido as like tanks and stuff like that. But at the time, that was what really stood out about Whitebeard, where it was just like just this fucking gigantic tank of a man that's like 80 years old on life support having heart attacks and still just like plowing through all these characters. And then the manner in which he dies feels like very much it's kind of the contrast of like, oh my god, this guy's so old he should be on his deathbed. But the manner in which he dies is very much like kind of like you would expect a really young warrior in his prime to die, which is dying standing. I think that's like a really cool spin on the concept of that, if that makes sense. And I think that that really makes Whitebeard special in the grand scheme of these old, you know, super strong old guy characters that you see throughout fiction. Taptia says it feels mythical. Yeah. Yeah, Oda chose to end it with Whitebeard feeling like a legend rather than, you know, an old man who's like on his last, like fading away. You know, because don't get me wrong, I love stuff like, you know, Oogway dying in Kung Fu Panda and shit like that. Or like, you know, like in any of these many stories with these old guys. But it's always written to feel like, you know, they're old, they're finally fading away with the last parts of their life or whatever, you know. They might go out swinging, but they feel old. Whitebeard, the way he goes down, it feels like he's made to feel old throughout the battle, but he's still made to feel like just a physical monster. And it feels legendary the way that he goes out rather than someone fading out, which is really cool. Netero from Hunter x Hunter. Yeah, I think Netero is similar, but correct me if I'm wrong, Chimera Ant arc came later. And then even with Netero, he's fighting with the giant Buddha statue. It's not really the same as like Whitebeard just like he himself is like the physical force tank that's just plowing through everyone. All right, we got Rocks winning the poll as the best old gen character. I could take that. I'm good with that. Again, Rocks, one of my favorite One Piece characters ever. Yeah, I personally have him as my favorite over Whitebeard, but Whitebeard is my favorite of the old man trope characters ever. All right. We're going to catch up through these supers, and then I'm going to have to call it a day because my throat is just... I remember at the beginning of the stream, I was really struggling. Slowpoke Picnic, thanks for the 8. Do you think Hooslop's once a decade hockey free trial is over for the arc and he'll get a non-hockey moment, or do you think he'll get a hockey bloom? 100% he'll get a hockey bloom. 100%. This whole arc is clearly setting up for big stuff coming for so many of the Straw Hats. Sanji coming up, Zoro coming up, Luffy still coming up, and Usopp, the fact that we're getting the tease with the observation hockey, like, it's coming. The Boy Who Cried Super Saiyan, thanks for the 5. Everyone who got stronger during their prime had dreams. Their conviction and will to achieve those dreams strengthened their hockey and strength overall. I like that. That's a really, really good take on it. That might even explain why, like, someone like Shiki still seems like, you know, he's old, he's from that generation, but we've seen him in Chapter 0. Like, we've seen him in the modern day and everything like that. We've seen him in Strong World. He hasn't aged badly, you know, like the characters who are still driven, and then the characters who achieved everything. That's a great point. Like Rayleigh Gaban, they're like, we're retiring. You know, we don't have it like that anymore. We can call upon it if we need to, but for the most part, we allow our bodies to slowly rest and like age. Mad Sun, thanks to the 2. Gaban versus Emu looked better than Young versus Harold. Who's Young? Rocks versus Harold? Or Loki versus Harold? Oh, Gaban versus... Gaban versus Emu looked better than the young version of himself versus Harold. I mean, because with the Harold fight, it's a flashback fight, so it is not really... This is a full chapter dedicated to Gaban versus Emu. That flashback chapter was kind of just a quick glimpse to basically show that Gaban and Shanks can't do jack shit to Harold. Therefore, Loki has to come and save the day, and the fight with Loki is just like a few pages as well, you know? So a lot was being done in the span of that one chapter. It's just to catch us up through the story rather than show us a lot of it, you know? Zolden, thanks for the 2. Did you watch Spider-Man? Probably next weekend. I think next weekend we'll watch that. Random guy, JV8CJ, thanks for the 2. Could Rayleigh and Gaban be Pirate King tier? Pirate King could be a wide range. I personally think... No, I think Prime, Rayleigh, and Gaban are... I think I would take the duo of Prime, Rayleigh, and Gaban over the duo of Kaido, Big Mom if the two had to fight, like, 2v2. I think it'd still be close. I feel like Rayleigh and Gaban are probably not in Roger and Whitebeard's tier necessarily, personally, in their primes, but I don't know. I don't know. I think Oda will always be vague with that. Okay. All right, everybody. We are gonna call it a day here on stream. Thank you all for tuning in. And yeah.